Good day, fellow deal makers. Welcome to the Deal Scout. On today's show, we're going to talk about acquisitions and culture, private equity, and family offices. Claire, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Josh. It's so great to be here.
Yeah. All right. So tell us a little bit about, we just met you in a coffee shop and we go, hey, Claire, I'm Josh. Who are you and what you do? That's what most deal makers start with, right? So let's start there.
Yeah, awesome. So I am Claire Chandler. I am a corporate survivor. I spent about 2 decades in corporate America, got out of that, formed my business Talent Boost in 2011. And I work primarily with private equity investors to help them achieve returns on their acquisitions sooner without the cultural resistance that tends to cost them time and money.
Hmm. Wow. You nailed it. All right. So a corporate survivor, 2 decades in the thing. So that puts you around 25 years old, right?
Love you. I knew we
Uh,
were going to make it, just hit it off.
so, you were going in corporate, kind of like walk us through what you were, how you got in the corporate world and what were you feeling before you made the exodus?
Yeah, I love that question. So I got into corporate America after swearing I would never work in corporate America. So that was the universe saying, hold my beer. Um, I'm the daughter of a small business owner and a school teacher, and so the white collar industry, the big company, the corporate machine was really not in my DNA. But when I graduated college, that's where the opportunities were. And so I was an English major. I picked the major that I thought was the most broadly applicable. So why not major in your native language? So I did, and that took me into a series of roles and companies, mostly in the blue collar industries. So a little bit of engineering, environmental industry, utilities is really where I made my bones. And I started out in communications and branding and marketing roles. Took a turn in customer service and customer relations, which I would not trade that opportunity for the world. If you really want to understand what a business is all about, who it serves, and how you can better understand how to bring value to those people who keep the lights on, you should work in customer service. And then the last several years in my corporate life, I was in human resources. So I didn't have the traditional kind of start in HR, finish in HR, kind of snuck through the side door. Started out there in training and employee development. And that just connected me with my passion, which was all about working with, individuals in the organization from the C-suite on down to the frontline union worker on connecting them more directly with what they are naturally good at, what they believe in, what they're motivated by, and put them in a position to excel and to inspire. And then I decided I was going to take my shot, and I left corporate America in 2011 and kind of dabbled a little bit as a consultant for a couple of years until I really figured out what I wanted to do as a consultant. And so I formed my business Talent Boost in September of 2013. So coming up on 9 years in business, and really just love what I do and have had focused initially on large organizations and trying to help leaders within those organizations navigate their way through the bureaucracy and actually try to lead people in the right way, in the right direction, with the right motivation, right? And so fast forward today, I'm kind of taking all of that skill and all that experience and all that perspective and helping the smaller companies through their private equity investors because, to me, there's such a huge opportunity to help these smaller companies get to the next level in the right way, with the right mindset, with the right leaders. And I feel like in my partnership with the investment community, we can really make a big impact on small companies and take them from good to great.
Mm. So in your exodus from the corporate world, what did that look like? Did you, flip some tables over and middle fingers up and I'm out? Or was it, I'm going to explore some things in my own life? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, if you talk to any entrepreneur, and I consider myself an entrepreneur, almost all of us have some sort of transformational event that propelled us into, out of that corporate, that safe, quote unquote, cocoon into, the great unknown of being an entrepreneur. And for me, it happened in the spring of 2011. I was, as I said, I was in an HR role by then. I was a vice president of human resources. I was traveling all over the country, sometimes to Canada. They got a lot of snow in Canada when I was up there. And my work life came to a grinding halt because I got diagnosed with cancer.
Oh,
And
geez.
so, yeah, so I went from traveling all over the place, going 150 miles an hour and constant noise to I've got to deal with this. I've got to take a month off of work. I've got to have surgery. I've got to have follow-up treatments. I've got to, kind of get my affairs in order just in case, right? I still remember the night before my surgery, kind of writing letters and leaving them in envelopes for people just in case. I had never had major surgery. I didn't know what was going to happen. And so I got through all that. I'm cancer free today, by the way. So that's not how my story ends, at least not right now. But it really, having that month of total quiet and total healing and total recovery was such a blessing, because I finally could not outrun that question that I had been dodging, while I was traveling and flying all over the country, which was, are you really doing what you're passionate about? Are you playing full out? Are you making as big of an impact as you could be making? And I had to admit the answer was no. I loved the company I worked in. I loved the people I worked with. I loved the team that I had the honor to lead, but I wasn't passionate and I wasn't really fulfilled. And so when you get a diagnosis like cancer, it really forces you to reevaluate where you are in life and where you want to be, to make sure that you share all the gifts that you've got in the best ways that you can.
Wow. So thankful you went through that journey, but man, that must have been tough. So here's a question that I have about this situation. It's kind of personal, but the show is called The Deal Scout. But I know behind every deal maker, there's a story. There's a story about the person that turns them into a deal maker. And I'm seeing this pivotal point that happens in most deal makers' life, where they're faced with the decision to invest, go all in, try this, try that. And the purpose here with this show is to connect deals and deal makers. So I want people to get to know you. So that was a setup for this is a personal question. Running in corporate world, right? HR, and you're traveling, you're going all over the place to a forced quiet through a traumatic event like discovering you had cancer. Sitting still for a person who's an entrepreneur, how how hard was that in terms of like the sitting still, the healing, the pausing, and what did you learn in that time about yourself?
Yeah. It is hard to get an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur at heart,
Yeah.
hidden behind the guise of a corporate executive, to sit still and to be quiet and to embrace the silence. And I know every leader I've ever encountered, every leader I've ever counseled or coached or consulted, struggles with that same, well, wait a minute, I can't take a day. I can't not have a chock full calendar of meetings and busyness, right? Because what would people think? I'm not being productive. And I would argue that you are the least productive when you are the most busy with firefighting, right?
Hmm.
And so for me, I literally worked until the day before my surgery. Too much to do. I don't want to leave my team in the lurch. I made calls to certain of my internal clients, people that were, in leadership positions that had been counting on me to do, different things as part of my HR role. And I remember feeling like I was going to let them down, right? Because I couldn't fulfill my business role.
Yeah.
And to a person, everyone, when I got back, said to me, Claire, I hung up the phone from you telling me that you had cancer and you had to take time off. And I hung up the phone thinking, I can't believe I had to let them down. And they hung up the phone thinking, I can't believe she has to go through this. And so it reminded me that we're all humans first, right? And we all go through a struggle, and that's kind of what connects us. It's not the business. But I did a very poor job of embracing the quiet prior to going on leave. And then, of course, I had surgery, which of course knocks you out. So I was forced to stop working. Couldn't bring the laptop into the hospital, right? I didn't check email for the first 3 weeks I was out, which was unheard of for me. Like didn't check voicemail, didn't look at email, didn't check in with my team. And so, I think because of the fact that I had major surgery as the sort of the gate I had to pass through from the real busyness to the real quiet, that transition was a lot easier, and it helped that first week I was in a lot of pain. Like I was recovering from,
Yeah.
kind of getting cut open and getting a couple tumors removed. So,
Yeah.
so it sort of forced me to go, all right, I just don't have the physical strength to be as busy as I was 2 days ago.
Yeah. Wow. I so appreciate you sharing this story with us. And this is a terrible like comparison, right? So I'm not comparing. Like you win on
But
this.
anyway, it's all right.
But today I had to I challenged one of my coaching clients that we were going to sit still for an hour and think. Put the phone down and think, right? Like so I sat in a chair in the sun and and I had my phone next to me and like the urge to check email, the urge to oh, I got to go buy this or pick up this material or I want to text this person and see how they're doing with the project or, encourage this person. Like that was so tough for me to just sit and listen. So when you gone through this process, you were forced to. You didn't really have a choice. But now you're coming out of it and you said this was a blessing. Like you count this as a blessing. You got to explain that.
100%. When I was going through it, I didn't see it that way. I mean, let's be honest. I wasn't marching into surgery thinking that this is I'm so honored to have cancer, right? I woke up that morning thinking, I don't want to go through this. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to have to deal with this day. And we've all been there. Like we've all had personal struggles, personal losses, a day that we wake up and we go, I just can't physically get through this. And you find a way. You find a way through your support system. You find a way through your own, your faith. You find it through your own belief that no matter what happens, I'm going to come out the other side of it. And I always, from later that year on, looked back at 2011 as the toughest year of my life, no question, and the greatest year of my life, because it truly was a blessing, because it woke me up to the fact that I was not playing full out, that I was not in a role where I was really freely and openly sharing my gifts with the world, so to speak, right? Where I was truly happy. And you talk to your typical employee, especially in corporate, and they're going to hear that and go, but that's why they call it work. You're not supposed to get enjoyment from it. And every time I come across that attitude, I'm like, I want to, do that scene with Cher from Moonstruck, right? Like snap out of it. Like it's not supposed to be like that. It's not supposed to be like that. And, and I remember I had my surgery in June. And I was out for a month and I came back and then I had a pre-scheduled vacation. So I went out for another week and kind of, enjoyed that a little bit. And then I came back in and I negotiated, the way I'm going to express it is I negotiated my release from the company. I had been there for close to 15 years. I had a great experience. I had the opportunity to make several career changes. I said like marketing and communications and customer service and HR and training and all this stuff. And so it was difficult for me to leave the people there, but it was not difficult for me to leave the environment, right? Mm-hmm. Because I knew that even if I failed, even if I fell flat on my face, even if I went out on my own and couldn't find one client, couldn't find one, person to pay me to do what I can do, the worst thing that would happen is I'd go back and find another job, right? And become a full-time employee again. And thankfully that didn't happen. And, here I am today telling the tale. But it was funny, like, I kind of negotiated a release and we set a date in, I think it was in mid-October for me to leave. So there were a good several months I was still there. And I remember after making the decision with myself, I was going to move on, communicating the decision to, the powers that be, that this is, what I wanted to do, and kind of negotiating the exit strategy. I would walk around and people would go, do you have to look so happy about your decision? Because I couldn't stop smiling. And
Yeah.
it wasn't because I was so miserable I couldn't wait to get out of there, because if that had been the case, I would have left far sooner. It was just that I knew I didn't have the first clue what I was going to do to build a consulting business. I just knew I was on the right path, and I knew I had to find out.
But you had to take that first step of going, okay, I'm a consultant on my own. What did that look like when did you take some time off? Did you just put your hat up and just say, "Hey, I'm a consultant now"? Like, how did that look, and what did the first client acquisition look like?
Oh, that's great. I love this question. So I wrapped up my corporate career on a Friday in mid-October, and the following Monday, I woke up early. Now, full disclosure, I am not a morning person. So like I live by the alarm clock, the snooze button. That poor snooze button gets worn out real quick because
Bam,
I'm one of those
bam.
hit snooze a couple of times until I have to get up. And then you start to sacrifice. Do I skip the shower today or the breakfast? Which is more important for me to get
Eat in
into
the
the office?
shower.
Right? Yeah, like whatever. Cereal's wet anyway. And I remember, so like that Monday I woke up and it was early, and I probably got up at like 7 still, which was a big for me. Like I had, obviously woke up way earlier than that to go to my job. And I get up and I'm not even fully out of bed yet. And I just start smiling. And then the phone rings and it's my mom, and she goes, "I'm just checking on you. Like, how are you doing?" Like, she didn't know if this was going to be like, oh my God, like in the light of day, this was like the, massively huge, stupid decision. And I said, "Mom, not only am I awake, I feel good about it. Can't stop smiling. I know it was the right decision." So, that first day, like emotionally, was so reaffirming that I don't quite know where I'm headed yet, but I know it was the right decision to sort of close the door where I was, go downstairs, go into the kitchen, put on a pot of coffee, you were talking about sitting in the sun and the quiet. I had forged such a great relationship with my sunroom. I had a sunroom at the time that I had spent a lot of time in during my, my month off to recover. So I went in there, put my feet up, fired up my brand new laptop because I treated myself, because if you're going to be a consultant, you have to have all the stuff.
Yeah.
Fired it up, had my sip of coffee, and I go, okay, so how am I going to build a consulting business? I didn't have a business plan. I didn't have a roster of clients. I didn't have the first clue how to develop business. When you spend your entire career in corporate and you get a regular paycheck and you're not in a business development role, you just go there and there's work for you to do, like day in, day out, night and day, weekends, holidays, doesn't matter. Like now I'm a consultant, I have to fabricate a business out of thin air. I had no brand recognition. I had no logo. I had no, like real focused niche that I was going to. So what I said before, that the first couple of years, I sort of walked the earth, so to speak, and dabbled a little bit until I really figured out, of all the things I could do, these are the things that, when you pull them together, are what I offer. It was a longer journey than in hindsight I should have taken, right? But yeah, I mean, I those early days were great. Those early days were great.
How'd you get your first client? What did that look like?
So my very first client, I was actually, it's all the power of the network and who you know and who knows you and all of that. So I had a really good friend from college who was running a training company at the time. And so since employee development and training and all of that were part of my skill set, he was one of the people I had told, "Hey, I'm moving on," and all of that. And he said, "Any chance you know how to train in," I don't know, he gave me like 5 topics. I said, all but that one. He goes, "All right, I got a client for you. Can you come up to Connecticut? I'm in New Jersey. Can you come up to Connecticut and do some training?" Sure. So, that was like a 1-week gig that turned into a couple of other assignments. I'm on site there the second month, and I get a call out of the blue from a guy that I had worked with in our corporate company. He had since left, and he called me out of the blue, and he goes, "I don't know if you're going to hang up on me." I'm like, I don't know where this is headed. He goes, "But I was just asked to start up a North American subsidiary of a global company. Would you come on board and run the HR for me?" And I said, "I'm not going to hang up on you. I'm not offended at all, but I'm already liking being out on my own. I'd been out for maybe 2 months. So I'm not going to come on board as a full-time person. What I will do though is help you build a team." And so that was he probably called me in, I'll say early December of 2011. And today he remains a client. He has since retired. We have built his team from, he had a part-time assistant to now we've got over 50 employees in 5 different locations. He's got a team under him. He has since retired. They're still one of my favorite clients. And so, yeah, that was my, other than doing kind of I'm paratrooped in and doing some training interventions. He was my first full client and remains one of my anchor clients that I absolutely cherish.
Yeah. What a great story. Now, you mentioned a word, paratrooped in. Are you a paratrooper, or are you from like the 82nd Airborne in the Army or something? Like, how would you even know what paratrooped in is?
I'm not actually, but I am married to a very proud veteran of the Marine Corps. And yeah, he had a paratroop from time to time. Most
Yeah.
times we can't really talk about on air, but yeah, I'm a very proud wife of a very proud Marine veteran.
Got it. I've got that tattooed on my arm. It says paratrooper. My father was a paratrooper. So like when someone
Get
says
out of
that,
here.
it's just like, there's a military connection. So
That's funny.
tell your husband or your partner that we stand and salute. We are very proud of our Marines, our military, police, fire, frontline workers. So thank you. We honor you guys. Thank you for that.
I will let my husband know. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got you some brownie points just there because you get to mention them. So how in the world did you get, like you start building this consultancy, you started getting some clients, you built a global firm, which is awesome. But how did you get into the world of private equity and acquisitions and family offices? How did
Yeah.
you get into that little niche?
It's interesting because to be completely transparent, it was not a niche that I had really considered in the past because it wasn't my background, right?
Yes.
And so it was about, I'm going to say like 2 years ago that, there's a lot of serendipity in your life if you're paying attention to it. And I had 2 conversations, I would say within a week of each other, where 2 people that I trust, they're in my network, but they're more than just a LinkedIn connection, right? They're people that we kind of bounce ideas off of, and we make connections for each other and that sort of thing. And these 2 different people, separate conversations, completely different topics. We were just sort of catching up, and I was sharing with them some of the work that I had been doing more recently, right? So working with larger organizations on helping build up their leadership teams and putting in systems to help prepare leaders to succeed, to kind of flatten their ramp to full productivity, to building teams that are, the right people in the right roles and all this sorts of stuff. And I'm talking about that, and unbidden and unsolicited, both of these different people said, you're really missing this whole universe of people who are so desperate for what you do. And when the first person said it, and he said, you need to be talking to the investment community, I said, well, why? I don't need an investor. And they said, no, they need you. And so we talked about it a little bit more, and I'm thinking about that. And then, fast forward to this other conversation less than a week later, and I didn't tee this up. I didn't say, hey, what do you think about, what this guy said? And again, just kind of catching up. What have you been up to? What's, some interesting work you've been doing lately? And he also said, he goes, you really should be talking to the investment community because they're buying these companies and they're finding that the biggest issues that they have are people related. And this is something that you do, and they don't, like, they're not taking advantage of this, and they're suffering because of it. And so, when one person says it, it's kind of an outlandish thing and it's sort of an outlier, and you file it away, but you're like, there's so many other things that you can do, that you can focus on. When the second person said it, and then I started to repeat. So then my husband comes home one night, and he's like, he's a big shot leader, in his company. And I go, let me just tell you this observation that 2 separate people had for me. And I said it to him, and he goes, well, duh. He goes, that is such a no-brainer for you to like bring what you do to them. Like, I'm surprised we haven't thought of that before, because like he's everything, right? He's my husband, he's my best friend, he's my partner in crime, he's my fellow strategist. And so when I bounce certain things off of him, and he goes, well, duh. And I'm like, okay, so
Yeah.
so I can't claim credit for that. I can't say, the logical pivot or evolution of what I do is to bring it to the investment community. But the more conversations I had around this idea and the more investors I've spoken with and started to work with, the more are saying, we didn't realize that somebody like you existed. We just didn't know.
Yeah.
And so, it has made for a very interesting and continues to be fulfilling evolution of what I offer.
Yeah. I think it's brilliant. As you're going along this journey, right? So then you said, "Well, I really don't have a background in, the investment communities, family offices, private equities. Like, how did you break into that niche? How did you land there? How did you paratroop in?"
Now we're going to overuse that, aren't we? Okay.
Probably.
So I did a lot of recon and I did a lot of stealth stuff. Yeah. So I would say it was a combination of research and conversations, right? The research side, because just having a few conversations with people who, we already had this sort of mutual familiarity and trust and deep caring for the success of the other, that only takes you so far, right? You then have to kind of test your theory and say, is this really something where I can speak with credibility to this, to this niche industry? And truly what I do and what I believe in and how I can get people from this point to this point, does that truly mesh with what investors are trying to do? And so part of it was research, right? Learning from the big guys, the McKinseys, the Bain and companies. There's so much research out there. And what I found was they absolutely validated that this is a pain point that I solve. And they also absolutely validated that my subset of this industry, the smaller private equity firms, the family offices, but not exclusively family office, but the firms that would love for McKinsey and Bain and company to come in and solve their problems and get their people aligned and get them on the right road and accelerate their growth strategy, won't talk to the firms that I can help, right? They're looking at engagements where, yeah, we'll work with you for 6 months. It's going to cost you $1 million. These guys are not looking to spend that kind of money, but they've got that kind of pain. And so learning from the big guys in terms of just validating that's the pain, that's the biggest variable by far in whether a deal, an acquisition succeeds or fails, is people related. It's not the market conditions. It's not, the geographic barriers. It's not the strength of the competition. It's the quality of the management team at the top of that company. And can they, do they have the capacity? Do they have the capabilities? Do they have the motivation to buy into your growth strategy and to contribute in the right ways to bring it to reality? And so we know this, right? We know this from McKinsey. We know this from Bain. We know this from conversations that I continue to have with investors. And investors go, okay, so that's the biggest variable, but we're talking about human beings. You can't measure them. You can't fix them. You just have to deal with them. And I say, hell to the no, that's not actually true, because you can measure them. You can align them with, the right roles. You can actually analyze and quantify what capacity they have to take your business to the next level, what capabilities they've got, and whether they're motivated to do it. And so when you have this conversation, that's where I get that kind of feedback where somebody goes, we didn't realize there was somebody like you out there. So here I am.
And here you are. So I'm taking a look at your website. What's your website? Give a little shout out for that.
Yeah, website is talentboost.net.
Talentboost.net. And some of the quotes on the front from Bain, right?
Yes.
From McKinsey, from these groups, 72% of businesses, 72% of the value is intangible. The biggest source of both deal success and failure come from management teams. Oh my gosh, 92% of businesses underperform when they delay talent decisions. Now, these are quotes from investment groups saying, made a lot of investments, acquired a lot of businesses, and these are where we find we've had issues. So for the people in the audience, if you're in acquisitions, if you're doing mergers, acquisitions, investments into companies, buying businesses, like, you may want to just come take a look at some of these quotes from guys who might have done a few more deals than you, so we
I've
can learn from them.
consolidated the research for them. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. I was like, holy moly, like this is pretty interesting because I have a similar mindset. Is I believe in cultivating people and building their talents, putting them in the in a book, Good to Great, put them on the right bus, on the right seat, right
Right.
person, right? And if the wrong person is in that seat, it's just they might be a great person, they might have great talent in another seat, but you get them in the wrong seat, that bus is going to spin out of control, right?
That's right.
So when you said, okay, I'm going to work in the investment community, how did you start to dig into that more and more, where you had investment groups calling you to fix their problems?
Yeah, so that's where the conversations came in, right? The
Yeah.
the networks. And it's interesting because you can't go from, building on a business and building out your network of large organizations and then just expect them to now, open up doors for you. But it is interesting how many people know somebody, or who knows somebody who knows somebody who's in this space, right? And so, in the early days, after kind of doing that research of, real high level studies and experts who know a thing or two, to your point, McKinsey and Bain and Harvard Business School, et cetera. And then starting to have conversations just to, and you talk to any entrepreneurs as part of the process, right? You kind of, you glom onto an idea, but you don't want to then get into your own sort of vacuum and get so enamored with, oh, this is an offer and it's brilliant. You have to have a conversation with people in the market and even find out if this is something they want to address, right? And you start to look for patterns in every single conversation I had in the early days, just sort of getting educated a little bit more on what they look at and how they apply the people side of their business in an acquisition type of an environment, which might be a little bit different from the large organizations that I'm used to, or the startups that are building from scratch. And what I found was it was generally the same. They were coming up against the same people issues. I think the greatest headache, and they don't all refer to it in this way, but I've boiled it down to two words. This greatest headache in terms of the variable in whether your deal succeeds or fails, and talent decisions and all those stats you started to read off the website. It comes down to cultural resistance, right? And so what I was finding in these conversations was every single investor would say to me, we know what we're doing. Like we know the companies we want to go after. We know which ones are going to add value to our portfolio. And we know the growth strategy that's going to get them there. And if you push them, they will all sort of say, yeah, the growth strategy is kind of brilliant. Like if we do say so ourselves, like it's flat out like gonna turn this company from good to amazing. And I say, so when you bring it into your acquisition, are they falling all over themselves to implement it? And they go, you know what? No, they're digging their heels in. The first thing we ask them to change, like, I had a client tell me, and this is so common, like one of the first things they want to do is maybe move them onto a different accounting system or kind of change the way their payroll is done. And you'd think that these big money guys had rolled in and started shooting their household pets like this. We're asking you to just kind of upgrade to a different system that's going to get you a little bit more professional and stabilize the platform.
Yeah.
And you'd think these people were getting like, their Fido's murdered. It's like, so the cultural resistance, yes, the human resistance to change, but those were all things that, the more acquisitions they do, the more they plan for that. But we're not talking about a change management process to get people on board with, moving from paychecks to ADP for their payroll. We're talking about you've got to actually move them and motivate them in ways that they're going to buy in and commit to your growth strategy. So start there. You've got to start aspirationally, not tactically. And I think that's one of the biggest areas that a lot of these investors kind of stumble on is they go, we're going to start with what we know. We're going to upgrade their systems. We're going to streamline their processes. And then the people that are going to want to get on board with us are going to get on board with us. And the rest of them, we're just going to change out. We're going to find a recruiter.
Yeah.
It's so backwards, right? Because if you don't have the people on board, it doesn't matter how great your payroll system is.
Yeah. They immediately, let's just figure out the numbers, systems, processes, but they forget the people aspect of this. And when your company is acquired, or if you're working with a group that goes through a merger or something, it's not just someone walking around going, "Here, put on a new shirt." You have new management sometimes, you have new leadership, you have new roles, responsibilities. You might be moved around. You might not think that you have a job after the acquisition. So from the employee's mindset or the management team's mindset, mid managers, like this is a this could be a really scary event that's going on.
It's hugely scary. And one of the challenges to that is when you're an investor and you're looking at a target company, more often than not, much more often than not, the only person you have access to pre-deal is the owner who's likely leaving, right? And so you only really have a certain degree of a glimpse into the company that you're going to take over. Now, if you get an owner who is completely out of touch with his or her business, and all they're waiting for is, the right number of zeros in the check, so they can go and retire to an island somewhere, you're going to run into, I think, more roadblocks than if you've got somebody who, at the very least, is very aligned with, again, the capacity, the capabilities, the motivations of the team. And ideally with someone who can give you some degree of access to the top management team behind them. And there are challenges with that. There are legal challenges with that. And a lot of the processes are set up in such a way that makes that a little bit more difficult. But one of the stats you just read off my website was that 72% of the value of any business is driven by the intangible assets. And when you look at that, and you just said, a lot of people, when they're doing their due diligence, they kind of focus on the tangible, right? What they can measure, what they can count, what they can see. So they're looking at things like headcount. They're looking at things like customer base. They're looking at things like, any pending or historical legal actions that we need to be aware of. What do the books look like? But in general, on average, 72% of the value of that business is intangible. It's the people, it's the intellectual property, it's the brand, it's the reputation, it's the institutional knowledge. And it is much harder to quantify, and it is much less familiar for most investors, which is why they tend to ignore it and say, well, we'll just deal with it as it comes up after the deal. And they find they're not paying attention to it on the front end, and that's all that's occupying them on the back end.
Yeah.
So wouldn't you be better served trying to measure that and getting out in front of that, and even trying to quantify and evaluate whether from the intangible side of this business they're even the right investment at all. But even if you discount that and you say, you know what, we're going to deal with that after the deal is closed, there are still ways that you can get in there in those early days, which are so critical to you starting to build momentum and get buy-in and get your growth strategy achieved. If you do those things on the back end, because now the doors are opened, right? And now you've got access to the top management team, and now you can actually measure the depth of talent behind them. And now you can measure their brand reputation and the alignment among the leadership, and all of those things that maybe you either chose to ignore before the deal was inked, or you had to ignore because you are limited in terms of who you can access. But it's those early days and weeks that are critical and are going to determine how soon, or if at all, you are going to achieve a return on that investment.
Wow. So as you're going through this process, give us some milestones of when you became a consultant 2011, started the business 2013. We're 9 years into this business. Give us an idea of what have you learned? Where have you found the greatest impact? Where you feel like you're living up to your greatest potential? Like, kind of give us the benchmarks that you think you've checked.
Yeah, love that question. I'm going to start with, if I had it to do over, those first couple of years when I was kind of walking the earth and figuring out, really, of all the things I could do, what I really wanted to do, and how do I build a business around that. I think a lot of entrepreneurs make the same mistake. Because I wasn't seeing revenue coming in, I was very selfish and stingy about what I was going to invest in going out. And so it took me a while to invest in a business coach. Looking back, that should have been the very first investment I made, probably even before I went to Best Buy and got myself a shiny new laptop, right? Because it would have saved me, I think, a lot of trial and error and false starts. If I had that type of of a sounding board. So that's something, that milestone of starting the business in 2013 likely could have been moved up and certainly would have been much more focused than it was. I get enamored by the creation, right, of building of things and of, sort of envisioning, how to close the gap for either an individual, a leader, a team, an organization from where they are today to where they want to get to, and how do we address that? And it's sort of like, that saying of the cobbler's children have no shoes, right? Like if I had only applied those frameworks that I apply to like every client that I have and really sort of, consulted myself, I think I would have, not tripped over as many landmines as I did. So yeah, so that was the first big milestone. And, that client that I talked about that called me about 2 months into my consulting journey, I didn't have a company name yet. I was still kind of just a consultant out on my own, kind of doing my thing, almost like a freelancer. And he hired me anyway, right? Because he knew from from our past working relationship, not only what I could do, but what it felt like to be in the same room with me. And you talk about milestones, and for me, they're not dates, they're sort of levels. And so for me, the biggest milestone that I reach with my favorite clients, and this has been without exception, is the day that they get to when they call me and they don't have a specific deliverable or headache that they need to work on, but they all say some version of, Claire, I don't know just yet how I need you, but I know I need you in the room. And when I can get a client to that point where they look at me not from, some of the deliverables or the projects or those near-term headaches, but look at me and say, I think better when you're here. I breathe more deeply when you're in the room because you're somebody who has been where we are. And it's a milestone that takes a little bit longer in the investment community because it's not an industry that I came from. But like I said before, it's the same journey you're trying to take your people through, that you're trying to take your business through. You're trying to get them from this scrappy, we took a good idea, we built it around the founder, and we started to build up this company. And now we want to get it to the next level, and we can't do it without some level of funding or outright acquisition. Well, the journey is still the same, right? And the big myth with those companies, if I can speak to the company side for a second, is that money is going to solve everything. And just because you get, the money guys to come in and either, give you seed funding or Series A or B funding or outright buy you, does not mean magically you're now going to know exactly how to take yourself to the next level. Even if the growth strategy of the investor is brilliant, right? You got to have the right people in the right roles. They have to be fully bought into where you want to get to. They have to find a personal connection between what they believe in and how they can contribute in a meaningful, impactful way to helping the overall company win under that new ownership. And so I'm kind of getting off topic of your question, but that's one of the milestones is getting to that point with every client, which historically has been, what emerges my favorite clients is when they get to that point and say, I don't quite know how I need you, but I know I need you in the room. And and this is not the first out of the gate, right? They don't just hire me and go, just sit in the room in the corner and inspiration will strike. It's after we've built up a relationship, certainly. But the other milestone has been how I show up in my business and in the world, right? And what I mean by that is, in the early days as an entrepreneur, you're trying to establish a brand, you're trying to establish a sort of a client roster and raving fans and all of those sorts of things. And so, you kind of show up in the world as a business person first. And that's obviously very important because you have to have a professional image and you have to deliver what you say you're going to deliver. But I found that the other big kind of breakthrough milestone for me in the last year has been how I show up in the world fully, right? And how I just sort of play at a higher level. And I know what I believe in. And I know not all necessarily the right things to do, but the right destinations to strive for. And I find that when I play at that level, it changes the total game for me. And that's what pulls people into my orbit.
Very, very cool. I love your energy. I think you're dynamic, you're magnetic, very cool. Um, this is one of my favorite parts of the show where I have this deck of cards that have questions on them. And
Is it
I
Cards
ask,
Against Humanity? Is it
I
Cards Against
wish
Humanity?
I should do that. Maybe on I have an uncensored show, so I might get a
Oh,
stack of
let's
those.
do that.
What a great idea. All right, let me put a note here.
You got it. Yeah, you got to make a note of that.
Great, great idea. Because it's an uncensored show, but this one
Yeah.
is a
Yeah. All right.
little bit
Okay. We'll
more
play it. We'll play it
investment.
safe.
All right. So tell me when to stop, and I'll pick a card.
This
Ready?
is fascinating. Go.
Okay, right here.
I was supposed to say stop. Sorry.
Yeah, you're supposed to. It's good enough.
I'm a
Good enough.
contrarian.
Um. Okay. So this comes there. There's two questions, but they both ask this question essentially. How important is someone's word and why?
How important is someone's word?
Yeah, they're you know being
Yeah,
honest
yeah, yeah.
versus lying, right?
It, it is so foundational to any relationship that your word can be relied upon. And that includes when you don't know the answer to something or you don't feel confident about something, that you are just as genuine and vulnerable, if you will, about what you don't know and what you're not sure of as what you truly believe. So I think it's absolutely foundational to us as if we're going to relate on a human level, it's foundational.
All right, now let's apply it to an acquisition where a group's coming in, they're like promises, 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 and all this stuff. How have you seen that gone bad, and how do you help integrate a better post acquisition integration?
I love that you segue that. It is so critical. You know, we talk about the degree to which the quality of a management team within an acquired company is pivotal to and essential to the success or failure of a deal. It is as important that the investor can be believed to be genuine. And I realize that there is a limit to how much they can be transparent about all the details behind the acquisition and their strategy, et cetera. But the fastest way not to overcome cultural resistance, but to cement it, is to violate your word just once, because the people in the company that you are acquiring and essentially inheriting from an owner are starting out suspicious, especially if they've not been given the opportunity or been allowed the opportunity to participate on the front end, right? So now they're playing catch up. And it's part of what I impart on my clients when they bring me in. The sooner you can either bring me in or at least bring my methodology in post deal to start to build that buy-in and commitment, the lower and the softer those fences of resistance are, right? Because I show them a way to have a very genuine, very transparent, very authentic conversation. And those sound like fluffy words, but boy, are they absolutely critical to building a business the right way. If your people can't trust that you are genuinely there to take their good little company and expand it to something amazing, even if it turns out through the process that some of them won't get to stay on the bus, they're going to love you for it.
So, Claire, during this interview, we talked about how you integrate and how you work with investment groups to bring in the people side of the people product process into the game of acquisitions and growth through investments. What questions should I have asked you that maybe I screwed up and didn't ask you?
You did not screw up at all, but you actually just touched on one when you just said people product. What was the third one?
People product process. Marcus Lemonis, the prophet.
Beautiful. So my 3 pillars are slightly different that I apply and help my clients achieve. And it's people, process, performance. And those 3 are not in a series. They're kind of a Venn diagram, right? Because the sweet spot is in the middle if you get all 3 of those right. If you put people in a position where you align them to the right roles, but you also connect them on a deeper level to what you're trying to get to. If you have a consistent, reliable process or system, right, for, I realize I just said system twice, but if you have a reliable process for connecting what people do, the roles that they're in with measurable outcomes that advance your growth strategy. If you do those things in tandem and they are aligned, you're going to start to accelerate performance, which is obviously the third part of the wheel. And too many investors focus on performance first. They say, we've got the money, we've got the brilliant growth strategy, we better start seeing a return on our investment. And they forecasted for that, right? And the problem is, because they're focused straight to bottom line performance, they're going right past the people. They're saying, get on the bus or go under the bus. And their process is flawed because they're not finding a consistent way to build that buy-in from the very early days. If you start with the people, you build out the process, you are going to accelerate performance. And so the hallmark of what I do and kind of my brand promise on the work that I do with my clients is, if you do it the way that I show you and the way that we work together when I consult with you, you will achieve returns at least 1 to 2 months sooner than you would have otherwise, because you're not going to waste nearly as much time dealing with the people issues, the cultural resistance, the digging in, the suspicion that you're not as good as your word.
So cool. So 2 more questions. One is, what does an ideal customer look like for you?
So we were mentioning McKinsey and Bain before, and I rely heavily on their knowledge and their expertise. But my ideal clients and the clients that I work with are not looking at McKinsey or Bain to bring them in to help them with their companies. So these are smaller investment firms. I've worked most recently with family office type private equity investors. They just seem to be kind of a niche that we're finding each other, even a little bit more so than others in the private equity space. But my ideal is a smaller firm, so say 50 or fewer members of the firm that have at least 2 acquisitions already under their belt. And the reason that is so important is, if this is your absolute first acquisition, like me, you're going to need to stumble through a couple of things and do a little bit of trial and error to kind of understand what it is you know, what it is you don't know, so we can narrow in on what you don't know, right? The other reason that's so important is, one of the very first things that I do in working with clients is we take, one of your high performing acquisitions, one of your low performing acquisitions, and I measure them. And because we have full access, because you've already acquired them and they've been in operation for a little bit, we can actually measure and quantify why this one is performing well and why this one is performing below your expectations. And part of what that helps us do, and if you go to talentboost.net, you'll see a lot of language around this, is the fastest way to grow your business, to grow your firm, to grow your fund, is to clone your success, right? Is to replicate what's working and to find more businesses, more target companies in your deal flow that resemble the companies you already have that are performing at a high level, and avoid the ones that aren't. And so I would love for your audience that's listening to this, if they are at all compelled to learn more about me or the work I do or how it might benefit them, go to talentboost.net. You will see an opportunity in there to book a free call to talk about this concept of cloning your success.
Very cool. Claire, thanks for coming on the show. Fellow deal makers, as always, reach out to our guests, say thank you, especially if you are a smaller investment group, 50 or less people on the team, has 2 acquisitions on their belt, and you're looking to improve your process, improve profitability through people. And my encouragement is that you reach out to Claire. Head on over to talentboost.net, take a look at what she's doing, connect with our guests, say thank you, and find a way to do a deal together. If you're working on a deal, looking for a deal, or would like to come on the show and talk about a deal, head on over to thedealscout.com, fill out a quick form, maybe get you on the show next. Till then, talk to you all on the next episode. Bye, everybody.